I should have known better the moment I stepped off the plane. But hope has a way of making fools out of people. I'm Arthur Miller, 30 years old, and I flew 12 hours across the Atlantic because my mother begged me to come home for Christmas. She'd called me in London at 2 in the morning, sobbing about how the family needed me. So there I was, standing on the porch of my parents' house in Phoenix, suitcase full of gifts in hand, smelling like stale airport coffee and recycled cabin air. I rang the bell, half hoping for a hug I hadn't had in years. Instead, my mother looked at my luggage, not my face, and said flatly, "You'll be watching your brother's kids. We're heading to Tahoe." The whole family laughed at some joke I didn't even hear. Something inside me just clicked off. I didn't grow up believing my family was cruel. Most people don't. You spend your childhood thinking whatever you're born into is normal. Even when it's twisting you into shapes you don't understand until much later. Looking back, I can see exactly how I became the predictable, reliable problem solver they expected me to be. But at the time, it just felt like breathing. I was the quiet kid, bookish, observant, happier sketching at the dining room table than wrestling in the yard with my brother Philip. He was the golden child from day one. Loud, charming in a sloppy way, always getting in trouble, but somehow making everyone laugh in the process. Teachers said he had potential. Relatives said he had fire. Meanwhile, I was the polite one, the one who cleaned up after dinner without being asked, the one who never made scenes. People love kids like that, until they realize they can use them. My parents, Edward and Helen, were never villains in the cinematic sense. No screaming matches, no slam doors. They were kinder than that, which sometimes made the manipulation harder to see. It came softly, through sighs and guilt and carefully worded disappointment. "Arthur, your brother just needs a little help, just this once. Honey, you know, we're not as good with money as you are. We didn't want to bother you, but we're in a tight spot. Always gentle, always urgent, always my responsibility." In high school, when Philip blew through his allowance in a week, I was the one who secretly covered him so he wouldn't get grounded. When Dad's business hit a rough patch, I picked up a part-time job and handed over the paychecks like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mom cried with pride about how dependable I was. She didn't cry when she spent half of it on new decor for the living room. But the first real sign, the one I ignored, because ignoring was easier, came the year my grandmother Lillian died. She was the only person in the family who loved me without expectation. She'd slide me novels wrapped in brown paper, sneak me pastries my mother thought were unhealthy, and whisper, "You're brighter than all of us combined. Art, don't let them dim you." She never asked for a thing. When she passed, she left a modest savings account. Nothing extravagant, but enough for a college cushion. In her will, she named me the primary beneficiary. I found out later my parents pressured the executor to redistribute it fairly, which meant splitting it in half and giving a portion to Philip so he could buy a used car. They called it balance. I called it the first time I felt something tear a little inside. I used the rest for tuition. Philip used his half for car modifications. Still, I stayed. That's what dutiful sons do, even when they shouldn't. After college, when I moved to London for work, a UX position with decent pay and long hours, my family treated it like I'd joined a monastery or something. "You're abandoning us," Mom said the day I boarded my flight. She cried the way she always did when she wanted something. Dad muttered about how kids these days think they're too good for their roots. Philip hugged me with one arm and asked if I could keep paying for the family phone plan, because switching providers would be a nightmare. I paid it for the next 6 years. At first, the requests were subtle. A forgotten bill here, a small emergency there. But problems in my family have always bred like rabbits. 1 became 3, became 8. What started as a couple $100s occasionally grew into regular transfers. Just until things settle. Just until the business picks up. Just until Philip gets back on his feet. Just. My mother was the queen of tapping the guilt vein. She'd send a photo of her and my father at a diner, looking stressed. "We haven't been out in months. Money is so tight." Then, 3 days after I wired rent money, there'd be photos of her at a spa with her friends. When I'd ask about it, she'd act offended. "Oh, Arthur, that was a gift card. You're being dramatic." My father wasn't as emotional. His manipulation was quieter, more practical. If I didn't wire money when he asked, he'd lay out all the numbers, showing me exactly how close they were to losing electricity or missing a mortgage payment. He always ended the conversation with, "You're doing well. We're proud of you. And family helps family." They kept saying family, but it never felt like we were all in the same family. It felt like I was an auxiliary generator powering their entire household. Philip, well, Philip was Philip. Charming, reckless, full of the confidence that comes naturally to people who've never had to clean up their own messes. He tried a new business venture every 6 months, dropshipping, flipping pallets, custom apparel, selling collectibles. Every single one crashed. And every single time, he texted me the same thing: "Hey man, can you spot me? Until next month, I swear, this next idea is the one." He had 2 kids before he had a stable income, Mia and Logan. They were sweet, energetic, and entirely unprepared for the instability of their father. Somehow, without even living on the same continent, I became the backup plan, the safety net, the invisible cushion that kept disaster from hitting too hard. I got into the habit of checking my banking app with the same dread some people reserve for horror movies. But the strangest part, they always thanked me, always acted like they appreciated it. That's the trap most people don't talk about. Gratitude becomes a leash just as effectively as guilt. The real shift happened last year, though I didn't recognize it then. My mother started talking more about the mortgage, how the bank was being difficult, how interest rates were ridiculous, how they wished things were simpler. Then one morning, buried under promotional emails and meeting reminders, I saw a message from the bank addressed to both Edward Miller and Arthur Miller, co-borrower. I stared at the screen for 5 full minutes. My name wasn't added with my consent. It was added because my credit score made theirs look better. They'd told me it was paperwork to help speed things up years ago. I'd signed something at the kitchen table one summer while Dad talked about refinancing. I was 22 and naive, and that signature had tied me to a mortgage 6,000 miles away. They hadn't mentioned shortfalls until I began seeing notifications on my end. "We're fine," Mom would say. "Just a blip." Except the blips kept hitting my credit. By then, I'd become too good at hiding my resentment, too practiced at pretending everything was fine, too used to sacrificing my own goals because the alternative was listening to my family crumble over the phone. But that night in London, when I sat on my bed surrounded by receipts, digital and emotional, I felt something shift. I realized the only reason they saw me as strong was because I never allowed myself to break. And that's exactly why they kept leaning on me. There was only one person in my family who never asked for anything: my grandmother Lillian. She'd once told me, "One day you'll have to decide whether loyalty means staying or whether it means surviving." Back then, I didn't understand the difference. Now I do. I'd spent years being the dependable son, the fixer, the rescuer. But standing on that porch in Phoenix, listening to them laugh like I was an extra in my own story, everything became painfully clear. They weren't asking me to come home for Christmas. They were asking their safety net to report for duty. And this time, I wasn't going to play along. The weeks leading up to that Christmas trip weren't dramatic in any cinematic way. No explosive fights, no slammed doors, just dozens of small, tightening threads pulling at me from 6,000 miles away until I could barely breathe. It always started the same way: a message from my mother. Not a greeting, not a "how are you," just "do you have a minute?" That was her code. It meant money. Sometimes I wouldn't even open the text before my stomach tightened. I'd stare at the screen in my flat in London, rain streaking the tiny window, the kettle hissing behind me, and wonder how I'd become someone who feared notifications from the people who were supposed to love me. One morning in September, she called while I was brushing my teeth. I answered with toothpaste foam still in my mouth, thinking it might be an emergency. "Arthur," she said, breathless. "We're in trouble with the house." The bank made a mistake. They're saying we owe more this month. Something about fees. I spat into the sink and wiped my mouth. What kind of fees? She sighed dramatically. Oh, sweetheart. I don't know. Your father handles all that. But we're short? Just a little. We'll pay you back when things settle. When things settle. She said it like things had ever settled. I transferred the money before I even left for work. My chest felt tight all day. I told myself I wouldn't do it again. I'd been telling myself that for years. But then Philip called. And Philip calling was worse. He never asked directly. He knew how to wrap money requests in jokes and self-deprecation. Art man. My best brother. He'd start. Even though I was his only brother. So, small hiccup. The kids' daycare is charging late fees. It's not my fault. The billing system glitched. Total scam. Honestly. How much I'd sigh. He'd chuckle like we were two idiots laughing at life. Nothing crazy. Just 100. Or maybe 2. But that's it. You're a lifesaver. He always said lifesaver like it was a compliment. Not a label he'd pinned on me so tightly I couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, my dad never called to ask for anything. He preferred numbers and logic and spreadsheets that conveniently left out his own mistakes. He'd send me messages about how electricity costs had gone up, how the truck needed repairs, how interest rates were criminal. He always ended with "We're doing our best. But it's hard at our age." Translation, fix it. Arthur, you're good with money. We're not. Some people drown all at once. I drowned in teaspoons. By October, the requests came weekly. Some small, some enormous. Groceries. Gauze. One month the water bill had mysteriously doubled. Another month, Philip needed emergency funds to keep his so-called business afloat funds. I later discovered he'd used to buy collectible sneakers. I started feeling it physically. Headaches. Sleepless nights. An ache in my shoulders that refused to go away. At work, my manager asked if everything was okay. I lied. I always lied. Because I didn't want anyone to know the ugly truth that a fully grown man with a stable job in London was still financially tethered to a family 3 continents away like some kind of unpaid ATM. Then the mortgage notification started. At first, I assumed it was a clerical error. Why would I be getting emails about missed payments for a house I didn't own? But the more I looked, the more I realized I did own it, or at least the bank thought I did. They'd used my name to qualify for a better rate. They'd tied me to a loan without explaining what that meant. Every late payment hit my credit. Every shortfall pulled my score down. Every mistake they made became my consequence. The strings didn't just tighten, they dug in. I tried to confront them gently at first. Dad, I'm seeing notifications about the mortgage. Oh, that's nothing. Just mixed up billing cycles. Mom, why am I paying for your phone plan still? Oh, sweetheart. Switching carriers is so confusing. Philip, your business isn't profitable. Maybe stop spending. Come on. Man, don't kick me while I'm trying. Trying. God. They love that word. Trying meant keep covering for us. Then came the real breaking point of part 3, not explosive. Not loud, just clarifying. It was a Wednesday night. I had just finished a 12-hour day. My dinner was a cold sandwich from Pret. London rain had soaked through my shoes. I was exhausted. My mom FaceTimed me out of nowhere, her face filling my cracked phone screen. She wasn't crying yet. That came later. Arthur, she said, your father and I have been talking. We need you home for Christmas. The kids miss you. And she hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth. And there are some financial things we need to go over in person. It'll be easier if you're here. Financial things. There it was. Then she added softly, this family needs you. Not wants, not loves, needs. And something in her tone, something small and sharp, lodged itself inside me. Not as a wounds heal. This was a seed, one that would grow into everything that came later. That night, I sat on my bed for a long time. Not angry. Not yet. Anger requires energy, and I didn't have any left. I just felt hollow, like they'd scooped something essential out of me without asking. But even then, even in that moment of clarity, I still hesitated. I still questioned myself. I still wondered if I was being dramatic, ungrateful, unfair. That's how deep the conditioning went. That's how long they'd been pulling the strings. And the worst part, I hadn't even realized yet that they were about to yank the hardest of all. I didn't explode when it happened. People imagine breaking points as loud moments shouting, shattering, chaos. But mine was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a temperature drop before a storm. When I landed in Phoenix, jet-lagged and aching, I still had this fragile thread of hope wrapped around my ribs. Maybe Christmas would be different. Maybe coming home wouldn't feel like stepping into a role I never auditioned for. That hope died the second my mother opened the door. She didn't even look at me, just at my suitcase. "You'll be watching Philip's kids. We're heading to Tahoe." Like it was an instruction on a grocery list. Philip sauntered into the doorway, with his sunglasses on indoors. Like always grinning as Mia and Logan clung to him. "Don't wipe your snot on Uncle Arthur," he joked, nudging them toward me. "He's jet-lagged." Everyone laughed. My mother. My father's somewhere behind her. Philip. The kids. Copying the adults, even though they didn't know why they were laughing. It was the sound of a family enjoying a joke at someone's expense. My expense? And in that moment, something inside me didn't snap. It shut down. Like a power grid failing one district at a time, lights going out across my chest until everything went cold. I didn't yell. Didn't argue. Didn't ask why they thought I had come home to serve them. I just stepped inside the house. The laughter echoing like a soundtrack to the last 30 years of my life. And set my suitcase down in the entryway. My back hurt. My eyes felt gritty. And I had spent more money getting there than any of them had ever sent me for anything. My mother was already moving through the kitchen, tapping the printed itinerary on the counter: flights, resort photos, activities. "See, this is why we needed you. Honey, the kids will stay with you. We'll finally have a real vacation." Finally, as if Christmas with me didn't qualify as a vacation, as if I was a household appliance being plugged in for convenience. Philip laughed again, scrolling through his phone. "Don't lose them." "Okay," Logan wanders. That was when my mother said it, the line that ended whatever hope I'd had left. "Your family. Arthur, this is what you're here for." Here for. Not to visit. Not to see them. Not to be a son. I was here to work. I felt the switch flip deeper this time. A final, irreversible click. Because for the first time, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't confused. I wasn't trying to justify them or make excuses in my head. I really saw them as people who had spent years shaping me into something useful. Not someone loved. They'd built their Christmas vacation on one assumption: Arthur will never say no. And suddenly, I knew I would. Calmly, almost gently, I asked my mother to gather everyone in the dining room. "Before you leave," I said, "we need to go over a few things." They followed, confused but unbothered, because they still believed they were the ones in control. Still believed I was tired. Passive Arthur who would grumble but comply. They didn't know a different version of me had walked through the door. One who had spent weeks documenting everything. One who had spoken to a financial advisor. One who'd printed a legal agreement. One who finally understood the truth. They weren't using me because they needed me. They were using me because I let them. And I wasn't going to let them anymore. As I opened my laptop at the dining table, a strange calm settled over me. The kind that only comes when you finally stop begging people to treat you better. Because this time, I wasn't asking. The strangest part wasn't their shock. It was their confidence, this absolute certainty that whatever conversation I wanted to have would end the way every other conversation had ended, with me smoothing things over, apologizing for being dramatic, and pulling out my wallet. They had no idea the balance of power had already shifted. When everyone settled into the dining room, Philip still scrolling his phone, my mother clutching the printed itinerary, my father looking bored and impatient, I opened my laptop. Not dramatically, not with anger, just calmly, too calmly. And that's what unsettled them first. Before any of you leave, I said, we need to talk about money. Philip groaned. My mother sighed. My father muttered, for God's sake. But I wasn't looking for their approval. I clicked open the folder labeled Miller Household, the spreadsheet glowing across the screen. Every transfer, every loan, every bill, 3 years' worth of silent bailouts. Color-coded, time-stamped, itemized. This, I said, scrolling slowly so each line punched through the air, is what I've covered. Mortgage shortfalls, Philip's business expenses, Dad's truck repairs, utility bills, groceries, streaming services, monthly emergencies that always seemed to coincide with major sales. My mother pressed a hand to her chest like the truth itself was offensive. Arthur, you're making us look like terrible people. I'm not making you look like anything, I replied. I'm just showing you what actually happened. Philip leaned forward, eyes widening as he saw his own notes pop up beside transfers. Promise, I'll pay you next month. I swear this one is the last. His face drained of color. Dad's jaw clenched when the knee surgery copay scrolled into view, followed by the receipt for the new flat-screen TV he'd bought the same week. But I didn't pause until I reached the total. A single bold number at the bottom. Over the last 36 months, I said quietly, I've given this household just over $60. Ling ling ling. For a moment, the room froze. No breathing. No excuse. No jokes. Just silence. Then I placed a stack of papers on the table. This is a simple agreement, I explained. It's not a lawsuit. It's not a threat. It's just documentation that this money wasn't a gift and that you acknowledge the debt. My father slammed his palm on the table. We're family. You don't put family in debt. I met his eyes. Family doesn't put their son on a mortgage without telling him. Their faces drained as I opened the next tab. The resort reservation. The flights. The confirmation number. All with my card's last 4 digits. I pointed to the bold red word under the booking. Cancelled. Philip lurched forward. You what? The bookings were under my account. I said, I canceled them 3 days ago. You had no right, Dad barked. They were purchased with my money. I said, the right was entirely mine. Mom shook her head frantically. Arthur, we told everyone. How are we supposed to explain this? You'll figure it out, I said, just like I figured everything out for years. But the true shift the moment their world tilted came when I clicked to the email from the bank. My name, my father's name, co-borrowers. The truth laid bare. Dad went pale. Arthur, don't do this. I tapped the screen. My financial advisor explained what my options are. I can remove myself from the loan. If you don't qualify without me, I paused, letting the reality sink in. You may have to refinance or sell. My mother's voice cracked. You can't, please. Arthur, we'll drown. I've been drowning, I said softly. You just didn't notice. Then I pulled out the final letter. My formal notice. I said, I'm stopping all automatic payments related to this property. The bank will contact you, not me. Mom whispered. But the grocery money, the utilities, you'll handle them, I said, like adults. I canceled each autopay with a click. Ping, ping, ping. Emails confirming the cancellations hit my phone like tiny liberation bells. Philip looked at me with something almost human fear. Maybe. Arthur, give us time. I'm working more shifts. I swear I'll change. You should have changed before I funded your life, I said. Then I closed my laptop and stood. For the first time, I wasn't small. For the first time, I wasn't the solution to their crises. For the first time, I let them feel the weight they'd been putting on me for years. Calm, steady, almost gentle. I delivered the final blow. I'm done playing the role you wrote for me. From now on, let you face your own consequences. As I picked up my suitcase, my father spat. If you walk out that door, don't come back. I didn't flinch. If your love requires my bank account, I said, then it's not love. And I walked out, leaving behind the version of myself they depended on. A version I was never going to be again. Leaving that house should have been the end of it. But people who lose their favorite source of comfort don't let go quietly. And my family, my parents in particular, weren't used to a world where I didn't absorb the fallout for them. The confrontation didn't happen in a kitchen or a living room. It happened in public, where the truth had nowhere to hide. It started with a phone notification 3 days after I moved into my condo. A tag. Philip had posted a vague complaint online about people who betray blood. My father reshared it with a long paragraph about children forgetting who raised them and God humbling the ungrateful. They didn't use my name. They didn't have to. Friends from my hometown started messaging me. Some concerned, some judgmental. But one message sealed what came next: a screenshot from a family friend announcing a GoFundMe to support Edward and Helen in their time of hardship. Hardship I had been silently covering for years. Something inside me didn't get angry, it calcified. That same afternoon, I received an email from the bank requesting updated information on the mortgage, followed by letters addressed to both me and my father. They wanted new income records, updated statements, proof the loan was being maintained properly. My parents must have gotten the same letters, because the next morning, my phone finally rang. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. The second call came an hour later from my mother. "Arthur," she whispered, panic strangling her voice. "We need to talk. It's urgent. Your father is furious. The bank is asking for things we don't have. Just, please meet us." I didn't answer that call either. But when Philip texted, "Mom is spiraling. Dad's about to do something stupid. Can you please just meet them so they'll calm down?" I felt that old instinct twitch. Not responsibility, not guilt, just a desire to put an end to the chaos they were creating. So I agreed. We met at a neutral place, the courtyard outside a public library downtown. Wide open space. No walls for the tension to bounce off. No room for them to twist the narrative. I arrived first, set my laptop on the table, prepared myself. When my parents appeared, they didn't look like the people who'd laughed in my face a week earlier. My mother looked wrung out, hair flat, eyes puffy. My father looked furious in that simmering, brittle way older men get when life stops obeying them. Philip followed behind them, hands shoved deep in his pockets, expression tight. He wasn't there to gang up on me. He was there because he was afraid of how far our parents were willing to fall. My dad didn't sit. He started pacing immediately. "You've embarrassed us," he snapped, jabbing a finger toward the bank letters clenched in his hand. "You made us look incompetent. They think we're hiding something." I kept my voice steady. "You are hiding something. Years of missed payments. Thousands of dollars I covered to keep your house afloat. That was help," he barked. "Help because that's what families do." I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet again, not because they hadn't seen it, but because there was no arguing with cold, hard numbers. "This isn't help," I said. "This is support. This is responsibility. This is dependence." Mom finally sat down, shoulders slumped. "Arthur, the GoFundMe wasn't our idea. Your father didn't mean for it to get so big. People assumed. They assumed because of what you posted." I said, "Because you let the world think I abandoned you without reason." My father slammed his fist onto the table. "You did abandon us." Philip winced. Mom flinched, but I didn't move. "No," I said, voice calm in a way that made him angrier. "I stopped funding a lifestyle you pretended you could afford. That's different." He opened his mouth to argue again, but Philip cut in, his voice quiet but firm. "Dad, stop. We all know Arthur wasn't lying about the money." My father rounded on him. "You shut your mouth." "No," Philip said, louder now. "I'm done lying. He's been covering everything. For all of us." Silence. A heavy one. The kind that cracks foundations. My mother whispered, "Arthur, the bank says we need to requalify. We can't afford that. We'll lose the house." She looked at me with wide eyes, the way she always did when she wanted something softened. But I shook my head. "You won't lose the house because of me. I said. You'll lose it because of years of choices you refuse to take responsibility for. Dad stepped closer, lowering his voice in that menacing, patriarchal way he believed still worked. You're going to fix this, he said darkly. You're going to call the bank, put the payments back on your account, and tell them everything is fine. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Instead, I slid a folder across the table toward him. Inside were statements documenting every transfer I'd made in 3 years, every shortfall I'd filled, every bill I'd covered, every autopay I'd canceled, along with a letter drafted by my financial advisor, stating formally that I requested to be removed as co-borrower and had notified the bank of misuse of my name without full consent. Dad's face twisted. You'd betray your own blood with paperwork. I met his fury with calm. You betrayed me with paperwork first. The words hit him harder than shouting ever could have. He staggered a little, like he'd been shoved. Mom started crying quiet. Hopeless tears. I never wanted this, she whispered. I thought we were just asking for help. I didn't know it was hurting you. You didn't want to know, I said. That's worse. Philip sat down across from me, elbows on the table, rubbing his temples. What happens now? He asked. I closed the laptop. For me, peace. Financial independence. A life that isn't tied to your emergencies. And us, Mom whispered. I held her gaze. You will face your real circumstances for the first time in years, without me cushioning the consequences. My father opened his mouth again. But this time, nothing came out. Not anger. Not blame. Just breath. Shallow and defeated. Finally, he sank into the chair beside my mother. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as an authority, but as a man drowning in the consequences he'd never believed would reach him. I stood, picking up my laptop. This is my boundary, I said quietly. You don't have to like it, but you will respect it. I didn't storm away. I didn't cry. I didn't look back at their stunned, devastated faces. I simply walked slow, steady steps across the courtyard, leaving behind the version of Arthur they had depended on. The version who said yes until it destroyed him. The version who believed love meant sacrifice. Now, finally, I understood that love without boundaries isn't love. It's servitude. And I was done being their servant. I didn't feel triumphant after the confrontation. No cinematic swell of victory. No moment where the world suddenly felt lighter. If anything, the days that followed were unnervingly quiet. For the first time since my early 20s. I wasn't waiting for a bill notification with my name on it. I wasn't bracing for a guilt-laced voicemail. I wasn't checking the exchange rate before wiring money across the ocean. I woke up in my tiny condo, sunlight spilling across the floor, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not the empty stillness of isolation, the steady stillness of finally being out of someone else's storm. Meanwhile, my family was dealing with the consequences I'd shielded them from for so long. It didn't happen dramatically. It happened in small, visible ways, breadcrumbs that told the story without me needing to ask. Philip texted me first, not asking for money, just updating me. Kids and I moved into a smaller place. Cheaper. I'm picking up warehouse shifts and delivery runs. It sucks, but I get it now. There was no defensiveness in his message, just reality, and a kind of humility I'd never seen in him. A week later, one of my aunts posted holiday photos. My parents' once carefully curated living room looked different. The fancy decor gone. The oversized TV replaced with a small, older one. The expensive shelving unit noticeably missing. I didn't need an explanation. My mother had started selling things. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. Out of finally understanding that money doesn't magically appear when you feel entitled to it. Then, almost a month after the courtyard confrontation, my mother showed up at my condo unannounced. No dramatic entrance. No guilt in her voice. Just a weary woman standing at my door, clutching a grocery bag and an envelope. Inside was a check. Not large. Not symbolic of repayment. But real. Earned from selling things she once bragged about. saved from small paychecks she used to dismiss as barely worth the effort. "It's a start," she whispered, and something inside me cracked, not painful, not bitter, a soft fracture where resentment had once lived. She stayed only 10 minutes. She apologized not with excuses, but with honesty. She told me Philip was working harder than ever, that the GoFundMe had been taken down, that my father was still angry, but anger wasn't going to fix his life anymore. Reality was, before she left, she asked a question so gentle, I barely recognized her voice. "Do you think, someday, we could have a holiday together that isn't about money, just dinner? Just us?" I didn't promise anything. Promises were the first currency they ever took from me. But I said, maybe, when the truth isn't something we have to fight about. She nodded, hugged me, and walked away. And for the first time, her leaving didn't feel heavy. Over the following months, something unexpected happened. My boundaries became a quiet map for other people in my life. A coworker confided that she finally stopped paying her brother's rent. A neighbor told me she separated her finances from her parents. A friend from London admitted he'd been carrying 3 cousins financially and didn't know how to stop until he heard what I'd done. I didn't lecture anyone. I didn't tell them to follow my path. I just shared the truth. Loyalty without boundaries isn't noble. It's self-destruction. And the people who truly love you will adjust to your boundaries. The ones who only loved your usefulness will fall away. In time, I learned something else, something my grandmother Lillian had tried to tell me years ago. Helping isn't wrong, but helping people who refuse to help themselves will hollow you out from the inside. I spent years mistaking exhaustion for devotion, years thinking love meant giving until I had nothing left. Now, healing didn't look like revenge. It looked like finally choosing myself. Quietly, consistently, unapologetically. And as I watched the city lights flicker outside my condo window one evening, a cup of tea warming my hands, I realized something simple but profound. Walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a better one. If you've been listening and this story hit something familiar in you, take a moment to share your own experience. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more stories like this about boundaries, family, and taking your life back, stay connected. Follow along. And let's keep this conversation going. This content is created by the Kitchen Tables team for entertainment purposes only. It is fictional and not intended as advice.